Hi, everyone. We are so excited that you're here with us. Nikki and I have been working on this project for a long time. And honestly, we can hardly believe that we're actually here. So, thank you for taking a leap of faith with us as we start this journey. You'll hear us talking about our own experiences, our work with clients, full confidentiality mode, and trying to unpack all the complexities that we see every day in the world of leadership, especially related to generational and neurodiversity. We intended for this to be plain, raw, and vulnerable because as leaders, it is often pretty tough to do that in a public platform. So we hope that you'll gain something from our journey, maybe be inspired to challenge yourself to do better, but most of all, just enjoy our conversations. We'll start with sharing interviews of each other to give you some context about who we are and what we do. But then you can expect more open conversations and some really incredible guests who will be joining us as well. So, with that, let's get started. Here is episode 1.
Hi, my name is Nicki Straza, and I am a certified flourishing leadership and workplace culture facilitator and coach who specializes in generational diversity. With over 25 years experience in nonprofit, corporate, and small business, I have seen the good, the bad, and the ugly side of workplace culture. As we move into the future, we are living and working longer, and the demand for leaders to navigate with high levels of emotional intelligence is increasing. With up to 5 generations working together, each seeing and experiencing the world through a different set of generational norms, it is becoming critical that we both understand and leverage our generational differences so that we can see every generation thrive in the workplace.
Hi, I'm Sherry Dockery. I'm an executive coach and leadership consultant specializing in ADHD, neurodiversity, and well being. As an ICF trained coach, I bring a strong foundation in applied neuroscience, mental health and addictions, and ADHD. I often refer to myself as a reformed corporate executive, drawing on my own experiences in leadership that challenged my values, my ADHD traits, and my leadership skills. I integrate facilitation, mindfulness, and psychological health and well being practices to promote excellence in both business and in nonprofit leadership, focusing in on strengthening unbreakable connections, not the labels that separate us. I currently serve as chair of the board of directors for Woodview Mental Health and Autism Services and as chair of the board of governors for the Brantford Brant Norfolk Ontario Health Team, supporting collaborative governance across 19 partner agencies. I've held leadership roles in healthcare, developmental services, and mental health organizations, and I continue to work with the Canadian Mental Health Association Ontario Division, delivering mental health training across the province. I also coach and mentor executives and leaders through my private practice of 11 years. All right. I'm really excited because we're going to start off our series, our podcasts, with us interviewing one another and really setting the stage for how we are hoping some of the conversations will go with some of our guests. So today I am going to do an interview with Nikki as we are moving forward. I'm going to ask some questions, kind of framing the conversations we're hoping to have, setting a bit of an example perhaps, and then we're going to trade places and Nikki's going to get a chance to interview me. So let's start off. Nikki, I'm so glad that we're doing this. First of all, I'm really excited because I think that this is a great way to be able to share with people what the passion is that we have for this topic and kind of why we even started doing this to begin with. So I'm really excited. So this is fun. Let's get started.
Sounds great. I'm in.
All right. So I want to start with the first question that we've talked about so much and really starts to frame our conversation. And that is, what do you think is it that makes a healthy workplace culture? What does that look like? What does it feel like?
See, it's such a great question. And it's one of those things that I think culture is so intangible that sometimes we don't even think about it, but we just know if it feels right or it doesn't feel right. And for me, that's why I love that question. What does it look and feel like? Because for me, a healthy, flourishing workplace culture feels peaceful, feels like opportunity, feels like I'm valued, feels like I'm part of a team, and it feels like we're on a mission together that's important. And there's a lot of feelings in there. And it's one of those things that sometimes our business, processes squeeze out the emotional kind of dynamics of workplace culture. But I always say that Sunday night is a litmus test to the culture that you're walking into. And if you have that pit in your stomach and you are just dreading going in on Monday morning, that's a good sign of what workplace healthy or a dysfunctional workplace feels like. But if you're excited to show up and to contribute and to make a difference, that makes a big difference as well.
Yeah, I love that. You're so right because when we think about the emotion piece and we're driven by our emotions, yet in the workplace, we don't really acknowledge the fact that that is what's driving behavior. No matter how reasonable or logic the behavior might look like, we're still driven by that. And the feelings that we get, the experiences that we have are actually really quite visceral. So I think that brings us into this space where what an example, like, you've worked in many different environments, you've worked with many different people, and there's a reason why, or there's examples of situations where you've been able to tap into exactly that feeling that you're talking about, or you felt it from the other side that it's not the good feeling. And I really would love for you to be able to share maybe an example or two of times that that experience has been good or bad, or what of it that you think has really helped to shape your beliefs around this?
Yeah. And that's real. And it's funny because one of the very first places I worked was at a small family-owned business and the office, I was hired as the office administrator. And the office staff were very collaborative, very empowering, and it was a really great place to work. And then the executives would come in. So the vice president and the president would breeze in. And literally, the moment that door opened and that person stepped through the through the door, through the window, through the door, all of a sudden the eggshells were everywhere. The tension went up. And like in this polarizing experience in one job, I experienced this dynamic of, oh, I'm supported, I'm doing great, and I can make mistakes. And in the next breath, oh dear gosh, and the anxiety and the stress and the eggshell walking and the high tension. And that I didn't realize until hindsight began to really shape my awareness of why that's important. And that was an early shaping experience. And I know, the reason I stayed with the organization as long as I did was because of who I got to work with the most often. And I don't think, my story is that unique. I have so many colleagues and friends who and family members who have experienced great cultures and have experienced highly toxic ones. And sadly, it shapes our own well-being. And I began to see that effect on me, and that helped to really make it really important for me.
Yeah, and you're right. I think, all have stories that are really similar to that, that it's almost like the worst case scenario is what helps us to recognize what it shouldn't be and maybe what it should be. But you brought up a really good point, which is that impact on your well-being. And, we don't create enough space to think about what that means when we're thinking about the workplace, because our well-being, again, is without that is that foundation of how we're able to show up. I'm really curious, how did that affect your well-being?
Well, it sent me on a trajectory of coming close to burnout. And, my own self judgment, my own perfectionism, coupled with regular criticism, regular high expectations, fear of getting it wrong, some of these different dynamics. And then, pressure and obligation to perform at a certain level. I didn't learn how to take care of myself. And so I was just dipping and expending and depleting myself until I got to a wall where I knew if I didn't figure out how to start taking care of myself, that I was on a precipice of ill health, burnout, and who knows what. And thankfully, I was self-aware enough to be aware that that is the precipice I was sitting at. And I had a mentor who recommended a book to me about learning how to rest. And it was one of those things where, you know, I, I literally was took a week of holidays. And to be honest, it was not even like my husband and I joke now that it was the worst week for him and the best week for me because I went in with a whole intention of how I was going to do things. And unfortunately, I was totally neglectful of what he was going through. And he had just gone through a whole bunch of stuff too. And so I, focused on myself, good for me. But it was one of those things that, again, it brings your awareness around to I'm not the only one that's being affected. My family is affected when I'm affected. When my husband goes to work day in and day out in a place that is very, very toxic, he's affected and our family's affected. And it's one of those things that, it's hard to grapple with sometimes. And it's hard to own the responsibility that I'm the one that has to take care of me.
That is a really good point, and I think it's one that I know I see frequently when you struggle with that. There has to be certain things in the workplace that allow for that psychological health and safety to exist in the workplace and to create permission for people to respect that for themselves. And on the other side, though, it's the you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. And we can create all of the strategies, but ultimately if the person doesn't hold on to the ownership of that, you know I think the danger there is that even when there isn't that, you know well structured or accepting place, if you own that, you can take that wherever you go. You can always own your well-being. But I think that that give and take is a really, really important piece. So I appreciate you bringing that up. I'm a little curious to see from your thoughts, what did the result what was the result of that on how you then started leading? So when you moved into leadership roles and you were the one that was creating that space, well, how did that impact you? What was the impact on your behavior and your perspectives?
It's such a good question. And for me, it was twofold. It made me more aware as a leader of how I was showing up and invited me to question how I was being experienced. And it also helped me cultivate empathy, recognizing that, I'm showing up as a leader and it's hard. And then my colleague is having a great day or not having a great day. And it's because leadership is hard. And, it gave me a lot of empathy in that moment to be able to relax my perfectionism and relax my expectation and the demand and to humanize the work experience in a way where people were first, not task. And, it's one of those things where as I began to realize what I needed to thrive, it became really, really important for me to create and give permission to my team to do the same for themselves. Now, of course, if they chose to or they didn't choose to, that was fine. But in some cases, I would hold them accountable. Actually, this is what's important here is that you take care of yourself. And creating that space of saying, actually, I appreciate that this thing needs to be done. However, you need to go and take 2 hours, have a little nap, eat some food, and come back when you're ready because I am not interested in having this product done at the expense or the cost of you.
Mhm.
And it has taught me, and it's been a hard journey. Like I would hardly say I learned this lesson easily overnight. This has been years of making mistakes as a leader, but I have been learning how to put people at the center of the work we do over task. And it doesn't mean that task is important. It's just that task is secondary to connection.
I absolutely love that you brought that up because what I want to know is how did you do it? So how did you really make that believable to the people that, you were leading? How did you let that be the culture that was created for them? And how did you continue to reinforce that? How did you make it safe enough for them to do those things for themselves?
Well, first of all, I had to walk the talk. I can't say one thing and not do it for myself. So that started with asking for permission for what I needed. So in a moment, it's like, you know what? I actually don't have the emotional bandwidth right now to tackle this. Can we circle back in 30 minutes? So modeling it was huge and number one, because that is what helps to bring credibility and alignment. I think dysfunctional culture grows in the gap between what we say and how we live and our behaviors. And when those two things aren't aligned, that's when dysfunction grows and mistrust and the unspoken rules and all of those kind of things start to grow and fester in that space. And I recognize for myself that in order for me to have alignment between what I say and what I do in the workplace, I had to have alignment internally, which meant if I was being self compassionate out here, but not self compassionate in here, I was still out of alignment. And that meant I had to address my self talk and my self sabotage and my constant self criticism because I was actually performative when I would tell somebody, no, no, you really should take care of yourself. When and people can smell that inauthenticity,
Mm,
right? And so a lot of my journey was really dealing with all the icky stuff inside of me. And I think that scares some leaders because, I'm a firm believer that the culture in here becomes the culture out here in our team and in our organization. But this is the scary work. This is the vulnerable work. And, if we can create a space where I can acknowledge I'm working on my messy middle with my team, that gives permission for them to do the same. And then how we handle those mistakes, the language we use, our process of dealing with things, those processes all begin to stack onto the modeling, the processes, the shared language, the shared purpose. And then ultimately it's trust building at its core.
mhm. Amazing. And it's funny because the simplest sayings sometimes really help us drive that message home or a message home. And I think back to when my kids were little and the whole do as I say, not as I do. And my kids would totally call me out if I did something I told them not to do. And they still do. And the thing that I think really resonated for me in that is the people can smell that a mile away. We're so effectively wired to pick up on authenticity. And it's funny, I was having a conversation with a colleague yesterday about a mutual contact within the industry, and both of us were like, "There's just some yeah." And amazing person. But both of us sense this inauthenticity that's there. And all of the actions that this person does are incredible. They have this wonderful list of accomplishments. They have this fantastic list of things that they're focusing on and talking about as if those are their beliefs. There's just some other little thing that just doesn't feel like it lines up, and we both recognize it, and it impacts our experience in that environment, and we're coming in to the environment that this person is in, not as we're not reporting to this person, we're there as colleagues, except that we're also there as an external organization, and so we don't live in that space. But both of us can recognize that we feel that drain that it's a grueling experience or that it's tougher than it should be, and it's something that we struggle to put a name on. So I think what you're talking about is so important for leaders to recognize that they think that they're putting out something, but people are really smart and really tuned in, and they're probably picking up on whether or not it's authentic. So yeah, that's amazing.
I think if I can add something here, this is why the generational dynamics matter. Because depending on the generational cohort that you came from, that like different styles of leadership were considered appropriate. And for older generations, they were expected to leave their personal home or personal life and personal struggles and their internal struggles. That was all in a silo in a box over here. And when you came to work, you were the monkey and you jumped when they said how high. And inauthenticity was expected because authenticity was vulnerable and weak. And we have come so far in 80 years where now our young people are like, actually, if you don't tell me you're making mistakes, I don't trust you. Whereas for our boomers and even some of our Gen Xers, the notion of acknowledging that they didn't get something right would be to you know, hang their own career. And we have all of these different dynamics in the workplace. And so yes, authenticity is so important and alignment is so important, but holding grace for those different perspectives and the fact that not everyone has experienced leadership and the workplace the same way now invites us to a conversation of listening and learning that is challenging for the best of us.
Such a good point. It's funny. The title of our podcast is Dissonance Disrupted. And I wanted to ask, so why is that generational piece so important in disrupting dissonance? How is that a really important piece of it?
Think as human beings, we are programmed to think that our generational cohort is right, that those older than us are rigid and outdated, and those younger than us are stupid and slow and lazy. Well, if we keep perpetuating this conversation, how is that productive? We live in an environment where technology has accelerated things so much. We're living longer, we're working longer. And 300 years ago, life expectancy was maybe 400 or 40 years old. We have a whole nother life we're living now. And we have this expectation now of bringing these different perspectives together. And there is genius in every single generational experience. There is insight and wisdom across the spectrum of emotional intelligence skills. And we lose that wisdom. We lose that sense of belonging and collaboration when as we said in your bio, like we're looking at the lines and the things that divide us instead of the things that bring us together. And with 4 to 5 generations in the workplace now, our ability to cross those lines, disrupt the status quo, disrupt the norms, be a bigger person, bring to the younger generations what we didn't receive, learn from the younger generations what we thought we already knew. That's what disruption actually looks like. And it's truly beautiful, but it's messy.
Yeah, you're right. It is definitely messy. And I know, when I sort of sit on the border of, that cusp of a generation change. And it's interesting because I think, those of us who do probably have a little bit of a foot on either side of that. And maybe it makes it more complicated, but I think it's actually a benefit because we can see more perspectives or, we can see things slightly differently. So I love that you brought that up. So I think that I want to ask another question around you've talked about what causes the dissonance and you've talked about the kinds of disruptions. So if we were to think about strategies for disrupting the impact generationally or, in general with leaders especially. But what would those strategies be that would be really effective for doing that disruption of what people are experiencing?
Think for me, in my own experience, the most powerful disruptor is the humanizing of the individuals in the interaction. That that ability for us to put people first, to care about people first, to empathize, to lean in. I think that really, really matters. And I think that's a disruptor because sometimes we're just so, got to get it done, got to get it done. And we get our nose to the grindstone. And putting people first forces us to put our head up and our heart out. And that is a vulnerable place to be. But how does it feel when you are seen, when you are heard, when you are appreciated, when you are acknowledged, when you are validated in your space? What does that do to you as a person? It stirs up something emotional. It stirs up passion. It stirs up engagement. It stirs up creativity and innovation. And it allows us to lean in. And if we can make that people centric, protect connection first rule, surround that connection with safety, and then surround that safety with really clear, concise communication where we are leaning into that understanding, saying what we mean and meaning what we say, and having that integrity. Oh my gosh, we are creating concentric circles of incredible power.
Yeah, I love that. I really do like how you've wrapped that up because I think that we sometimes think that it is always going to be messy. And in some ways I think it is, right? But we're not going to avoid that. But there's plenty of times where I reflect in my leadership and think, "Oh, that wasn't a good strategy." But I think that when we can put the human first and when we have those really clear definitions, as you've mentioned, I think that it makes it feel a lot less messy.
Mm.
Even when we're really not sure where we're going or how we're getting there, and there are messy parts to it. I like how you said our mess in the middle or our middle mess. What did you call that?
The messy middle?
A messy middle. I think that even with that, at least there's some sense that there is framework and it's containable and that we have the capacity to rein that in. These have been really amazing. I want to ask the last question, and this is I think the thing that we've talked about many times as and you talked about this earlier. If we don't have compassion for ourselves, if we're not authentic with ourselves, it's pretty impossible to show that to everyone else. So I want to know, what is your secret to creating self compassion?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I think I think for me it's twofold. It's one, reminding myself that I am deserving of it and catching myself when I disqualify myself. And my second hack is that beautiful word yet. I haven't got this figured out yet. I can't
Mm.
do this yet. I'm struggling, but I will figure it out. And just adding a little bit of that buffer of grace in my self-talk. And, as a certified flourishing coach and facilitator, we really lean into mindset, neuroscience, and how we talk to each other and talk to ourselves because that informs so much of our interaction. And we have a lot of autopilot that dictates our life. And if we can disrupt the autopilot in our own lives with a gesture of self compassion and a kind word towards ourselves, speaking kindly to ourselves, we are wielding one of the greatest forces in the universe. And I think that's really, really powerful. And so I think to be a disruptor in unhealthy workplace culture, we first have to disrupt the culture here. And giving myself permission to do that without judgment and without shame has been a true gift.
Amazing. Well, I've loved being able to unpack this with you. As much as we've had a lot of conversations, this was fun to be able to do it this way. And of course, this is just the beginning.
I cannot wait to do this with you and all of the other guests that we're going to have these conversations with. And I'm excited in our next episode to interview you, Sherry, and hear your story. It's going to be fantastic. Thanks for
Me
having me.
too.
Thank you so much for listening today. If you enjoyed what you heard, please be sure to click that subscribe button and share our podcast with anyone who would be interested in hearing conversations about generational and neurodiversity in the leadership world. Also, please check out our website, www.dissonancedisrupted.ca. Dissonance Disrupted is a collaborative podcast created and hosted by Nicki Straza of Straza Solutions and Sherry Dockery of Mindwave Co. Editing and sound by Evie Toddy. Marketing and administrative support by Shaylin Wilson.